LBR LBO Debrief, Business Climate Outlook of 2016.
I think Eteri started off by saying that this was a highly anticipated budget, that everybody was waiting to see what would be said in the budget. There was a sense of a significant change in the political and policy environment in Sri Lanka, and everybody wanted to know what the difference was going to be. But there's also a saying that says, the more things change, the more they remain the same. So the questions actually that was raised by many of the panelists are asking the question, did they change, or, are they pretty much the same as they were before? Now, at least one person's written in to suggest that at least one thing has changed. They say, good to hear a central banker speak openly. So some things have changed, okay? But maybe some things also have remained the same. So let me start exploring. Since there are so many really interesting questions and you're going to throw out more, I'm going to ask each speaker to limit their response to 2 minutes or under, and I'm going to just stop you if you're continuing. You can come back and speak again, okay? Let's come to this question. Deshal, you presented a somewhat optimistic view. That yes, not everything is hunky-dory, but it's kind of sort of in the positive direction. Fiscal consolidation is planned, and there is some movement towards it. But then Eteri said, there's a problem. We expected it to be 4.4. It looks like even 6%. The numbers are not really credible. We can't map things to the policy statement. Amal said, next year looks exactly like last year, perhaps even worse. And Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe says, look, there's so many problems in this fiscal consolidation, expectations and projections. So, there's this children's song that says, Fuzzy Wuzzy was a bear, Fuzzy Wuzzy had no hair. Fuzzy Wuzzy wasn't very fuzzy, was he? Okay, so is there fiscal this fiscal consolidation budget, is there fiscal consolidation in it, or is there not? Okay.
I think the PM statement says that he'd like to see fiscal consolidation going forward, but no, there was actually if you look at, say, for instance, the revenue proposals, there was very little concrete that can really justify the kind of expectations of revenue growth that are entailed. So no, but what I would expect to happen, as I said when I spoke as well, is that I don't think they'll allow the budget deficit to go completely off the charts, but what they will be compelled to do is to cut back on their capital expenditure. So all of the nice things that they've spoken about in terms of investing more on social services, education, health, etc., I think those are the ones that are likely to find getting suffering as a result of the inability to generate the revenue to meet your requirements. Because if you look at existing government revenue, almost the entirety of it is expended on your salaries and wages, interest payments, and your transfers on things like subsidies and so on. So you're kind of stuck in a bind. I think the trickier part looking at next year is that, what Amal alluded to as well, the ability to raise your cash from offshore sources. If we don't strike a balance between domestic financing and foreign financing in a sensible manner, we'll have the risk of either your interest rates domestically spiking, that's going to choke your investment and your consumption as well, that's going to hurt economic growth, or if you can't, and...
Deshal, are you just being polite? Is there fiscal consolidation, or is this a failure?
I'm being polite, of course. I'm very polite, okay. But yeah, I think we can all read into that. You can see it quite clearly that the revenue is the key, and that there is not enough justification of where your revenue growth is going to come from to meet this. So, as it stands, 2016, we are going to. I think we are going to struggle to meet our expectations.
Okay. Is there anybody who wants to add to that? And I'll give you only 1 minute. Is it Amal or is it Eteri? Yes, Eteri. Go ahead. Maybe pass that and pass the other mic around to Deshal. Yeah.
Well, I think budget numbers tell us there's not going to be fiscal consolidation. So that's what Ministry of Finance estimates itself. I think questions that we are discussing now is how implementable is budget going to be, and is it going to be carrying the risk of higher budget deficits than it's even projecting, and how credible future path of fiscal consolidation going to be. Because if you do simple arithmetic, okay, you have written off 2015 as a transition year, you anticipated 2016 as a reset year, but it still carries fiscal expansion, then to reach Prime Minister's goal of 3.5%, you have to be doing fiscal consolidation of almost 1 percentage point starting 2017. And well, it's going to be very difficult if you're going to go through that path, because consolidations of that size could be quite painful. It's easier to start gradually and build up than do some things that could be quite painful. And that's something that resonates with having a short-term vision and long-term vision. I think is you have to set the goal that's like 2-3 years away and then gradually build up to that, because there is no way around fixing your revenue situation in 1 year. You can't do it because it requires significant overhaul of legal and implementation systems, which need to be addressed through new laws, new regulations, digitalization, new operational frameworks. So you could announce it, but you have to be able to lay the roadmap and concrete sequenced actions, how you are going to get there. And I think that's what's missing, like not going from one budget to another budget, but setting a 2-3 year vision with a concrete achievable results and building gradually towards that. And I think I don't want to give my interpretations, but that's effectively what Prime Minister signaled. He set medium-term goals, which he thought that need to be there as macro-operating framework.
Thank you very much, Terry. I'm going to bring Amal into the picture because, he called it straight up. He said, John Maynard Keynes, when he came up with a brand new economic theory, that all dealt with the short term, and people said, so, Mr. Keynes, what about the long term? And he said, well, in the long term, we are all dead. And Amal said, I don't care what happens, 5 years from today, show me the results in 2016. Amal, given that, this is the prognosis, so you're looking at a situation where in the short term, your call about not enough improvement seems to be, borne out by the other speakers also. What do you suggest? How should business respond? How should, what is the response to that kind of situation that you would provide? There's another mic down there also, yeah.
Okay. Essentially, when you have the kind of macro imbalances Sri Lanka has right now, you have 3 ways you can deal with it. Exchange rate, interest rates, fiscal. Ideally, if you don't want pressure in all these areas, well, in one particular area, you let everything sort of adjust rather than let one sector or one segment. For example, if you let the entire pressure of the adjustment be taken by the exchange rate, clearly there are going to be inflation impacts. And that was, I think, if you look at it from a broader macro point of view, was the hope that there'll be, in line with the longer term fiscal consolidation, there will be some attempt to, tighten things up in the budget. So now, clearly, the budget doesn't look, even indirectionally, it's 5.9. We did our own projections are it's closer to 6.7% or something like that. So we are going the other way with the budget. It's unlikely. End of the day, we have to make a call. And in our assumptions, we are going to be going the other way on the budget. So then the entire pressure is going to be spent on either the exchange or on interest rates or both. So if you want me to tell you what we would be telling people about what to be ready for next year, be ready for some pretty sharp increases in the exchange rate or interest rate or both together. That would be our view in terms of being ready next year. There's going to, somewhere down the line, something's got to give. Even the IMF's advice was you need to start looking at tightening your monetary policy as well. And I think the central bank will have to look, is this looking achievable? And look, if the fiscal is not going to do this, monetary is going to have to deal with it, or just let the exchange rate do the full burden of adjustment, and squeeze.
Amal,
incomes
if I
that
can
way.
intervene, now some might argue that exchange rate already has done a significant adjustment. Why are you interpreting that as, why are you not interpreting it that way?
We keep looking at the exchange rate against the US dollar. We have to understand that what we've done is pretty much what a lot of emerging countries that do the same exports. I mean, I don't think there's been any real exchange rate adjustment when you look at other currencies. It's been, I mean, yes, it's good. I mean, I'm actually, in terms of exchange rate policy, post liberalization of, I'm quite happy about that. Because I think, I mean, okay, they're still intervening, but I think the level of intervention is a lot more. And I think the direction of letting the exchange rate move, I think it's a good thing. The government has, or the central bank has, I think, let the exchange rate go a lot earlier. I mean, earlier they used to hold it for a lot longer. But I think, especially with this budget, the signals given with it, I think there is, could be a lot more to go, unless, of course, they tighten on the fiscal, on the monetary side.
LBR LBO Debrief, Business Climate Outlook of 2016.
Now, Desha, maybe you can also add your thoughts to this thing of what do we do in this context. After that, Reyes, I'm going to come to you and not ask you to talk not just about fiscal consolidation, but tax consolidation, because that was your area of discussion, and to see whether Fuzzy Wuzzy's problem applies there as well, okay? Yeah.
Yeah, so no, I agree with Amal. I think it's hard to say what exactly the government would choose in terms of which variable that they're going to allow the burden to happen on. But I think necessarily you're going to see interest rates increasing in 2016. And I'm guessing that you'd see the market rates going up and the central bank probably following, rather than the central bank making the first move on that call. But I think if you're looking at already, you've seen treasuries have been increasing. PLR has gone up by about 120 basis points so far in 2015. And I expect more of that next year as well. I think the key is for to watch out what will happen on, say, for example, the external front. We still have about $300 billion worth of foreign investments in local government securities. And that is something that has eroded quite steadily during the past 12 months. And with US action on rates expected next week, whether you'll see further erosion on that side or to what extent that has been priced in. I think that is one thing that I would look out for. And another data point that is interesting is the real effective exchange rate. Now that is something that the central bank publishes, and that gives an indication of what Amal referred to as well. It looks at how the Sri Lankan rupee is compared to the basket of the countries that we trade with most regularly. So that is still quite relatively elevated. It has come down a little bit off the highs that it was prior to the adjustment, but it's still elevated compared to what it could be. So I would agree again that there is room for further depreciation of the rupee in 2016, probably less so than what Amal anticipates, but I still think that there's room for further adjustment on both.
Super. Thank you, Dashar. I just want you to know that I'm taking questions from the floor, and the question to Amal was really a question from the floor, Amal, that I just converted as my question. So thank you, Deshar, for that. There's another question, Amal, that's supposed to be directed at you, but it's really saying, will the IMF come to our rescue? You know, I'm not going to take that question. Eteri is here. It's unfair. You can't lead the witness, right? So we park that. We'll see. That's right. Reyes, is there is the tax structure being simplified? Yeah. Is it going in the direction that it says it's going? Or does the fiscal consolidation problem apply there as well?
Okay, before I get to that, I just want, as a non-economist, I just want to say one point.
Yeah.
You know, we are talking a lot about the government must do this, government must do that, but only thing is sometimes we ask ourselves, we said we are a very literate population. But, you know, when I talk to some of the, you know, the think tanks in the UMP, you know, and I asked him about some of the apparent contradictions, and one of them came up with a very interesting study. He said...
Just to explain, Reyes has never talked to me, right? And that's
good.
And that's right, yeah.
And he said something very interesting. He said in 2002, we did the right thing. Yeah. We stopped government recruitment, cut down public sector, freeze on recruitment, everything, and we got thrown out. So he said that, so if you're going to do the right thing and put the economy right, you must be there to do it. So therefore, they're saying that while we'll try and take the right direction, we need to also make sure that we are there, not get thrown out before, somebody comes and reverses everything else that happened, which is what happened on the government freezing of public sector recruitment, got completely reversed. Anyway, I won't get into because I'm not an economist.
So fair enough, you're saying there are political considerations that the old question we had in the first session that makes unpalatable reform difficult.
So I think we need to, knowing the current context in Sri Lanka, we need to understand that while there is a move, I look at it looking at glass half full. Okay, if there's a right direction going, there may be a few which are not palatable.
Dishal was trying to do the same, and I was nasty to him. Yeah.
Which only thing I'm trying to understand the reasoning possibly why some of those apparent contradictions are happening. But coming back to the tax thing, I think the tax direction is right. It is a generally accepted principle that the low tax rates will get you higher collection. But only one thing that I have always mentioned, see, I find that in quite a lot of the other countries, especially in the West, if you say you're not a taxpayer, they think you're a blackguard or an absolute rascal. In Sri Lanka, if you say you're not taxpayer, that's a big thing, Everybody likes to say, oh, I don't have a tax file. So I think, we need to change this concept. And that's why I told a particular part in the government, I said, run a campaign with the TV. It's a worthwhile investment. You see, we ask for new airports, we ask for roads, we ask for facilities, we ask for fancy things. Surely somebody has got to pay for it. I mean, we want everything from the government. And by all means, I'm completely not, I'm apolitical, I don't care who it is. But I'm just saying that we also have to play our part. See, tax rates have come down. At 15% is the lowest tax rate in the world, for God's sake. You won't get lower than that. You got 2.4 million threshold, which means up to 200,000, you don't pay a cent. Come on, if people who can't, at these rates, if you can't pay your taxes, there's no hope for Sri Lanka. Believe me. I think there is a message that I think we also have to understand. We can't just fold our hands and say, okay, you do everything, you borrow, we'll end up like Greece, right? You go to Greece, you find a beautiful metros, everything, nobody pays taxes, right? So you got more millionaires there per square foot than anywhere else, but they don't pay taxes. So I think we also have to get into a situation, look, there is a move in the right direction, tax rates have been brought down, corporate tax rates also come, not 15%, come on, other than certain sectors, other sector rates are 15%. Surely, if you can't pay 15% of 100 that you earn, right, then I think there is something absolutely wrong. So when we want the infrastructure, we want all the right things, we also have to learn to pay. So I think, personally, I believe the direction is right, but like somebody mentioned, we have done tax rates lower in the past, nothing's happened, the collection hasn't gone up. Yeah. I would think that there should be, coupled with the tax rates reduction, which is the right direction, there should be a process of education, saying that we also have to play our part, that we must pay taxes. Paying your taxes is important. I like that concept that they have in India and Pakistan about filers and non-filers. So maybe we should couple these taxes that we have on withdrawal of cash with saying that if you file your tax return, then you get your credit. If you don't file a tax return, that's a tax you pay anyway. So that's one way to catch. We did a research. We found that more than 85% of the taxes of this country are paid by 500,000 people, corporates and individuals. Only 500,000 are paying 80% of our tax bills, revenue. I mean, this is not tenable, So that is what I think. So personally, I believe the direction is right, but I think it has to be coupled with some education and campaign.
I'm going to stop you there and come back to Eteri, and then Dr. Nandalal also wants to come in. I'm going to give you all maybe a minute each here.
I think fundamental question...
Is this mic working? Yeah.
Fundamental question with the tax system here is a purpose. What for are you using tax system? Are you using it for incentivizing, or are you using it for collecting revenues? For 40 years, you have been using it for incentivizing. Effectively, every annual budget cycle is preceded with annual lobbying cycle or proposal collection cycle, let's put it this way, and then these new proposals are injected into the budget. So if you keep injecting every year, for 40 years it accumulates and it reaches the satiation point that it simply could no longer generate revenues, because you put so many incentives, exemptions, rate reductions into the tax system that it no longer works for collecting revenues. It works for incentivizing individual, business, sector, I don't know, professional, you name it. It's very hard to collect something when it's not designed for collection. It's designed for incentivizing. I think question that business community and leadership of this country has to ask, do we want to continue this way or we want to collect revenues? And that's a fundamental shift, the way you approach tax revenue collection. With all due respect, just reducing rates will not generate revenue, it will reduce revenue. Because reduction of rates may work if you are expanding your base. If you are removing all these holidays, exemptions, and you are bringing more people into the tax net by the law. They are obliged by the law to pay the tax. At this moment, it's not happening. It's just more rate reductions and more incentivizing. Why would anybody pay tax? I have special provision, I have special exemption, I have rate reduction. Why would I go and pay tax? It's carried as a badge of honor, as you said, not being paying taxes, because at some point you were important enough, so state gave you a free ride on the tax system. I think you reached the point that you could keep delaying this decision and keep borrowing. But there are certain limits to doing that. Implementing tax reform is extremely difficult because you need to bring your business community along with you, because you cannot implement it in vacuum. People have to come along and have to buy into the system. And that's where you have to have decision as a public, people, business, leadership, how you want to see your tax system. Do you want to collect revenues? If you want to collect revenues, you could collectively agree on, 5, 6, 7 taxes with minimal number of exemptions and broad-based that everybody pays, and say, okay, let's be done with it and forget about it for 10 years. And that's it. No annual cycles of incentivizing.
Thank you, actually. Yeah. I'm going to stop you then. Dr. Nandalal, I'm coming to you, but I want to make sure we focus the question to you. I think the question that Reyes is raising and Etteri is raising, they're raising from two different places, that actually people are not paying taxes and taxes are not being collected. Is there a problem in the administration of taxes, which is really a public sector functioning, an institutional and efficiency problem? And how can, why is the public sector not working in collecting taxes? What is the problem? Is it policy or is it just the poor functioning of the public sector?
I think there are basically both. On the tax collection, just one point I want to respond to Reyes is that bringing down taxes and education will not bring taxes. For example, if you look at people more educated, if still you have loopholes, they will not pay taxes. So, as example is who are not paying taxes in Sri Lanka are the most educated people, doctors and lawyers. Why aren't they paying taxes? Because they see they can prevent. They cannot pay. They can basically go out of taxes. So that's basically why, if you look at the countries where tax systems have been very efficient, is that you have proper institutions and proper compliance and laws, and those can be implemented in a simple way. So, there's a nice article that I want to comment on the KPMG article on Sri Lanka has now become the lowest tax regimes in the world. If you look at the countries in the bottom part of that, are basically Singapore, Hong Kong, Ireland, those countries are basically running fiscal balances or surpluses. Can country like Sri Lanka, which has been running 30 years of fiscal deficits, highest fiscal deficits, can afford to have a lowest tax regime compared to even the similar rated countries, peer rated countries?
Nandala, is that something that happened just by this budget, or has it been happening in the
No,
last
that
5
has
years?
been happening throughout the period. And one reason is that, let me explain, the exemption is basically giving opportunity for people to misuse it and come into a different kind of tax way, even with laws. And other part is the implementation and the use of technology. So some other countries, why their taxes are low? Because they have either Middle East countries, they have royalties or oil incomes, or they have proper systems and institutions to collect those taxes. Whereas in our system, we have in the Revenue Department, excise and the customs, where customs can be easier to collect because it's at the point of exit or entry. And excise also very small areas. When it comes to VAT, the income taxes, you need to have a lot of technology and you have capacity, skills and efficient institutions. And that is, I think, one of the issues, but that's not the only issue. There are a lot of other issues in the tax laws and the way that, the compliance. If I haven't seen anyone has gone to jail without, not paying tax here. But if in the US, if you not pay taxes, you're in jail.
Send them to jail.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I hope my mic is switched on. I don't hear myself enough. Etere, did you want a 30-second response? But I want to move on to another subject after that.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Nandala that it's a combination of issues. And your unpredictable, ambiguous, and relatively unfair tax legislation enables relatively ineffective administration. If you have clear rules and regulations and very little room for discretion, you are enabling effective administration.
Right.
But your legal framework is not designed to enable effective administration. So there has to be a sequencing of things. You need to incentivize effectiveness by providing clear rules, clear roles, and reducing room for discretion.
LBR LBO Debrief Business Climate Outlook of 2016.
I'm going to move on to a second subject. I think, Etere, you have set the agenda in many ways with your first talk. So you brought up fiscal consolidation at the beginning, but you also brought up the question of accountability, budget accountability. Who is responsible for creating these numbers? And who is responsible when the implementation differs significantly from what is given? Now, I listened to Dr. Nandala, and I got the feeling that the central bank doesn't feel it's responsible. Okay? Now that raises a question, well, who is responsible? Dr. Nandala, would you like to comment from a government perspective? What department of government, which ministry, which institution should be held responsible for coming up with correct, reasonable figures and policies on the budget? We know that, technically, just because I'm elected as a minister, I can't write a budget. That's a very complex task that requires skill and experience. And we have a whole public sector and public institutions dedicated to it. Who shall we hold responsible?
I think in the consultation process, I think we are also involved in terms of giving our views and advice, inputs to the budget. And the implementation part, there are different agencies who are responsible for example, now if you take revenue, there are three key agencies. One is the Inland Revenue, then Customs, and the Excise Department, those three departments. And in the process of preparing those numbers, I think they, as Honorable Minister already mentioned, they said that they have done all the simulations and come up with all these estimates. Those are realistic. And if they can't deliver these numbers, then there will be actions taken against those officers also. That's one thing this finance minister has clearly mentioned. You are the responsible agency, you have to deliver this. That responsibility is given. In fact, my concern is if I don't know who prepared those numbers, whether those numbers have been overestimated or ambitious, that I don't know. But by looking at the numbers, and if I don't want to be a person who is responsible for bringing these revenue numbers at all, I know by looking at the numbers, and that's why I said I have some sympathy towards these officers who will be held responsible for delivering or collecting these taxes. One can do a technical simulation exercise. If this thing is this to this level, then you will get this number of revenues. But one has to look at in a holistic picture where, so if you increase taxes, what will happen to the other activities? There's a whole economy is interconnected. So if one sector taxes are higher, then economic activity would be lower. That's kind of a tightening the situation. Then
Dr. Nadal,
one will have to look at overall situation.
I'm going to come in because your 2 minutes are up, but I'm going to keep the question with you. Etteri pointed out that for a lot of the expenditures and policies set out in the budget, there is no calculation of what the cost is going to be. That is very difficult to make it make sense. So are these calculations being made somewhere in government and kept secret? Or does government also not know what the costs are going to be for the policies in the budget?
No, I give one example. So, for example, now import duties. There's an estimate, what I understand, what they have calculated, the total revenue, about 40 or 45% coming from the import duties. So, on the assumption that next year also imports would be to US dollar some amount. So, that is a highly, unreliable number for anyone to forecast what would be the next year imports expenditure total. There are several other factors. You have exchange rate policy, you have the global factors, you have domestic economic growing going on, to have this, you have investment coming in. So several other factors. When you ask revenue agency to estimate the import duty collection, they simply look at this year number and extrapolate, and they see, okay, this is the import duty.
So what you're saying is the competence of these estimates within government are very weak. Because the politician is saying, give me the estimates. They're being given estimates that you yourself, on your assessment, feel are very poorly done.
No,
we have government agencies
I certainly can't say this is one example.
Yeah.
And as I understand how imported collection have been estimated, so there are a lot of risk factors in that. Then you do have alternative flexible policies to address if there's a risk to that number. Then what would be the alternative position, or whether contingency, or whether there's a kind of flexible rule. For example, now in some countries, there are clear fiscal rules by law. If you don't get this kind of revenue, there will be automatic adjustment to the expenditures as well. So then you kept the fiscal rule is to keep the budget deficit or revenue at this point at any cost. So then it's very clear. So there's a flexibility on the both sides. Whereas here, there's less flexibility on the expenditure side, and you have ambitious revenue targets. Then if they can't deliver that thing, then you end up with a higher deficit. So there are a lot of risk factors in all this. It's very difficult for anyone to make a projection of the economy on all the sectors, and that's a very challenging task. So you can't rely on that kind of projection to make very concrete and strong proposals for the year or in next
Deshal,
years.
I'm going to bring you into the conversation because now there's a real puzzle here. There is a sense that clearly there has to be some professionalism in the construction of budget projections, budget numbers, and we are hearing different things. On one hand, Dr. Nandalal is saying us that the finance minister has made it very clear that the bureaucracy is responsible. On the other hand, I think as a professional central banker, he's also very clear that he doesn't have much faith in what has come out. Where do we place accountability and responsibility, and why is it so elusive?
So I think one of the issues is what Dr. Wilson mentioned.
Is Mike, yeah.
Was what mentioned as well. I think there are a lot of different voices that come in. So I think the initial projections probably come up from the departments that are responsible, but after there's a lot of patchwork going on where different people, different entities will want different interests, and then it's I think at that point it's very difficult to say the original projection is the responsibility of so and so. So I think what is important is to kind of, whilst the issue of consultation is important, the issue of getting different views is important, I think it needs to eventually go down to the Department of Budgeting within the Treasury that needs to have this, the final say. And so accountability needs to be matched with actual work. The person who does that thing has to be held accountable as well. It's unfair to hold somebody accountable for something which he has very limited say into doing. So I think those two have to match. But if you're looking at it, there is actually a Department of Budgeting within the Treasury. That seems like the logical
Place the accountability should rest. Eteri, if you can come in on that, yeah.
If I may comment on that, since we have counterparts in central bank, in Ministry of Finance, including in those budget offices with whom we work closely, I could say that there is no lack of professionalism per se. People are experienced, people could do good estimates, they understand some of the risks of the estimates that they are producing. I think where issue is, and it's incentive. Like, is somebody checking at cabinet level, at parliament level, consistency and coherence of these main policy decisions? Sometimes we have the feeling that we are only people verifying how budget has been implementing and asking why it's not 4.4% and why it's 5.9%. Or why it's 6%. And that should be a departure point, that when cabinet presents a budget to the parliament for implementation, cabinet should also take responsibility around checking quarterly implementation and have discussions quarterly how this budget implementation is going. And maybe there should be also parliamentary oversight, presenting quarterly or semi-annual reports or annual reports, where actually you monitor how implementation went from quarter to quarter. And if you see there is significant deviation, then you have this discussion within the policy-making circle how to correct it. Then you give a fair incentive to your professional cadre to be responsible to give you realistic estimates. If nobody ever checks their work, why, okay, politicians have ambitions and they're producing ambitious estimates. And that's the incentive structure that is there. I'm not saying necessarily this year or past year. That's how incentive structure around budget implementation and monitoring is designed. So putting this responsibility on mid-level professionals, I don't think it's fair, because it's not that they are not professional enough. It may be that they are not asked enough questions.
Thank you very much, Eteri. That's a very good, I think, pushback on my attempt to put the public sector in bad light. Okay, thank you for doing that. Let me just read a few questions. I've taken questions from the audience. You know, there's a question that says, is it possible to know the views of the panel on how much depreciation of the rupee is required in 2016 and also increase in interest rate? Ideally, if you assume it's a mix of both, we'll need then to know how much of each. Now, my response to the person who asked the question is, you know, talk to Reyes. He's already advised you about trying to get something for nothing. Amal's your man. You know, pay him and hire him. He will help you later on. Okay, so moving on. Reyes, there is a question being raised to you about taxes. That is that, you know, isn't the indirect taxes so high that, you know, why are you complaining about these direct taxes being so low when indirect taxes are so high? Aren't they compensating for each other? And actually taxes on trade, even though the government reduced it from 4 bans to 3 bans, it seems to be that they actually increased the taxes on the larger number of items and reduced it on smaller number of items, effectively on their own projections showing a higher trade tax. So should people feel like I'm already paying taxes every time I eat and drink, why should I pay from my income as well?
I'm referring to the Prime Minister's statement about rebalancing the taxes.
Right.
You know, indirect taxes are easy to collect.
Yeah.
But I think it's not fair to burden everybody with a tax burden when I think the people who can pay should pay. Yeah. So I think that the Prime Minister's statement about rebalancing the direct, indirect taxes, I think is a right way to go. I'm a firm believer in making the tax system simple. Because the more complicated the system, the more people will find loopholes around it. The problem lies in the implementation, administration, tax administration. I think that's where a lot of our weakness. I saw a question here saying how the overnight transformation on the roads with the lane traffic. Honestly, yesterday I drove and I found that it was much better because people are scared that they'll have to go to courts. So I think if there is a very uniform administration, and I think the RAMIS that is coming into effect from 1st January 2016, if properly implemented, can help. I think what we should have is, I think we have a simple tax system now. We need to rebalance get more direct taxes coming in, and the way to do that collection is, I think, very tight implementation. I think RAMIS with some very consistent implementation might help.
Yeah. So I think we've taken a lot of the questions from the floor, and our time's almost up. Amal, am I being unfair if I ask you to kind of give the closing words, because everybody else has had more opportunity to speak? But if you can summarize your reactions to the fiscal consolidation, accountability, and public administration, all three things that are not necessarily the response of business, but really that matter for business a great deal if business is to succeed. But also I think you have to respond to Reyes's question, is business part of the problem? By trying to avoid the paying of taxes, is business actually creating the kind of government that ultimately undermines business, or the kind of fiscal situation? And is there a reason for business associations to also do a groupthink about how we are becoming a part of good governance, not just asking for it? Yeah. And you'll be the last speaker, and we will close from there. Is that good?
Okay, give me a relatively harder task at the end. Just one small thing about this accountability for numbers. Something I want to point out. We talk about the projections and accountability for projections, next year's projections. This year I found and the problem that you alluded in your first presentation, showing the long-term projections, how they don't work out. But I have a fear that somewhere down the line, we don't even know what we're working with right now. Because, I'll give you an illustration that will put everything else into context. 2 weeks before the budget, the finance minister said the budget deficit is going to be 6.9% for 2015. 11 months of the year gone, 10, 11 months of the year gone. Shocked a lot of us because it was more than we expected. With the budget, there were two documents released by the Treasury, Fiscal Responsibility Act report and the budget document itself. One said 2015, this year, number was 5.6%, other one said 6%. So within 2 weeks, 6.9, 5.6, 6% for this year, not about projections. So I don't know how that happens, but we have some problem here. I don't know how to deal with that problem. On the question of business, and I think that's important. So there are two levels to this. One is business that deliberately does not pay what they're supposed to pay. Okay, that's criminal. That should be, and I think, and pays off people that don't pay. I mean, it's a moral, it's a criminal action. I mean, just like corruption in Sri Lanka, it is, I don't know, I mean, I get very, very angry about that. Let's put it that way, very simple as that. We have that is a reason for poverty in this country. You know, you want to know why our maids are in Saudi Arabia getting treated by there? That is because the country's tax system is not there to give a proper social security net. These are things that, there are results of that. So that is the one aspect of business deliberately not paying what they're supposed to pay. Criminal actions, I call it. The second action is what you talked about, a culture that we have that in the budget or something else you expect government to tell you which sectors are good. Or even, I mean, that's a kind of belief that economists can tell you which sectors are good and bad to invest in. Even in a budget presentation, or, this sector, this is what they got. This sector, this is the Christmas list. This sector, this is what they got. I mean, that is what a budget presentation is. So, you get, business should basically, unless it's a sin sector, cigarettes or something, gambling, you want to tax and say, look, you don't want to do this, I don't think it's a business of the government economists to tell business which they should be. There should be one rate and business figures out what is good, where it is good. It shouldn't be bureaucrats or anyone else, but business has also got used to this over time, that the government should say what is a good idea and in that process lobby. Tourism is a great sector. You know, it probably is a good sector, but let the markets decide that. And that is the other source of, so it's a mindset that taxes are, like you said, I totally agree. It's a revenue collection. It's not a, trying to figure out whether tourism is good or agriculture is good or whatever. That, let the market figure that out for itself. Simple as that. So I hope I could give some perspective.
Thank you very much. I think our time is up, and Lakshman's going to stop me if I don't stop. Eteri, Amal, Deshal, Dr. Nandalal, Reyes, thank you very much for all your contributions.
LBR LBO Debrief, Business Climate Outlook of 2016.